So welcome to today's nonprofit seminar. We've been doing this for, I think it's like 15 or 20 years now. And it's really our way of providing education to the nonprofit sector. Nonprofit sector is something that's extremely important to us. While as a firm we do everything, 75% of the work we do as a firm is with the nonprofit sector. So we really feel that it's important for us to, there's just so much stuff happening in the sector. And it's very, very hard for us to keep on top of it. So I could just imagine how hard it is for you guys to keep on top of it with everything else that you have to do also. So we figured if we can take one day a year and kind of just focus on the sector and some of the education and what's happening in the sector, we figured that works well. From an agenda perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening from a trends within the entire sector. We'll have a legal update. We'll have an update from an accounting perspective, and then we're going to have a discussion about migrating software applications and some of the issues and stuff that you have when you move from one software application to another, and some other IT-related issues. So we figured that if we can kind of give you all a bunch of different types of information, nobody really wants to hear me speak for 4 hours, so if we can kind of break it up and give some different voices, that would be very, very effective. A couple things before we get started. Everybody has a packet. Within the packet is a whole lot of information. There's a whole bunch of marketing stuff that we throw out there just in case you don't know about us, give you a little more insight into who we are. There is the actual presentation with bios of the speakers and all the slides. We feel it's important to give you slides because you need to have a place to take notes, and you should take a lot of them. David, who's giving the legal update, also provided you with a thick book that he does every year. I just think that he feels that there are too many trees in the world and he wants to take a couple of them out. Couple other things that are in the folder. We do something called the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. That's something that we've been doing now since December, and we bring different experts in the nonprofit field to for a 45-minute podcast. And all of those podcasts have been stored on both our YouTube channel and on our website if somebody wants to see them. But if you want to kind of watch live and ask questions, our next one is July 25th from 12 to 12:45. We also have coming up right at this location on September 17th, we do the Imagine Awards every year. And then after the Imagine Awards, because the Imagine Awards, one of our goals within the Imagine Awards is education. So after the Imagine Awards, we try to bring the winners together for a panel discussion so that other nonprofit organizations can ask them questions regarding how they do business and how they're effective and all those other things. So it really is a good event. Again, it'll be September 17th here at Capital One. Having said that, Capital One, this is a great space, isn't it? Okay, and lots of good food out there. And the reason we got this great space and lots of this good food is because of these wonderful folks here at Capital One. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Joanne to come up a second. Joanne is amazing. Joanne, if you need a personal banker who's going to go to bat for you on absolutely anything you need, she's your person. So Joanne.
Thank you, Ken. Welcome, everyone, and good morning to all of you. I know it's going to be a long day, so please enjoy the hot breakfast out there and help yourself to coffee, water, and as they said, the ladies' room and gentlemen's room is to the right if you need to excuse yourselves. So I am so pleased to coordinate and work with Ken and his team here at Capital One and be a part of sponsoring this event. And here at Capital One, we are about the community. We are about non-for-profits. And up here, I have a team of business bankers as well as my manager. And I'm going to pass over the baton to my manager, Barbara Ligori. She is the market sales executive for Suffolk County, and she actually manages a group of business bankers like myself that handle business clients from anywhere from a $2 million up to a $50 million annual revenue space. So I'd like to pass this over to Barbara.
So thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Joanne. She is the best. I have a team of 13 bankers here on Long Island. I think it's funny, nobody's sitting in the front here. Is there a reason why like nobody's sitting in the front? Well, you have couches to lounge back there too. We moved in this space last September, so we've been here almost a year now. Built this building, built down in Maryland. We're moving into new states. We're growing nationally at Capital One. Right now we're moving into Florida, Chicago. North Carolina is going to be next. So there's a lot of expansion. We're in Boston and Philly. So there's a lot of expansion going on at Capital One here. We're a digital bank, really moving to digital, and you'll hear some of that from our folks here. Thank you for coming, and we welcome the opportunity to meet with any of you.
I asked Joanne if I can speak to you guys for a minute about one of our proprietary systems that our customers really learn to rely on and depend on, and it's called Escrow Express. So our nonprofit customers use it to manage grants, government funds, restricted funds, and even reimbursable expenses. The reporting is robust, so it can help in an audit, supporting an audit. It can help transparency for donors, even cut back on reconciliation time. And the best thing about this system, it is free of cost. So if you want to learn more about this system, please reach out to Joanne. She'll set something up for us. I can demo the system for you. And then also I'll turn it over to Phil, who'll talk more about a new system for nonprofit sector.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I am Phil Pochia. I am the Vice President for Commercial Payment Solutions here on Long Island. I help non-for-profit organizations specifically with vendor and supplier payments within their accounts payable. I help them with a program that's now offering up to 2% on a complete corporate liability program through our virtual card relay. There is some information in your folders regarding this program, but you can earn 2% back on your vendor and supplier payments by using our commercial platform. I'd be happy to speak with anybody who is interested about this, but it is a huge revenue implications with zero costs to the organization. So I look forward to getting to know you a little bit more. Thank you. And back to Joanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. I did put a bunch of different flyers in those brochures. I will be around at the end of the presentation if anyone has any questions or concerns or would like some more follow-up in regards to the two actually new and exciting platforms that just came out for non-for-profits. So two great programs. So thank you, Ken, and have a great morning, guys.
Thanks, Joanne, for making this possible. So we appreciate it. All right, everybody ready to dive into this? Let's try that again. Everybody ready to dive into this? Yeah. All right, good. That sounds better. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the trends that are happening in the nonprofit sector. If we're going to be talking about the sector, I think it's important to really understand what's happening in the sector from a broad brush stroke approach. So again, I think, why it's important to understand trends. I mean, if you understand what's happening from an external factor perspective, it gives you some understanding of what your organizational risk may be. And I think it's really, really important for organizations to understand their risk. There's so much risk out there from so many different sources. So again, the more you understand what's happening externally and how that impacts your organization, and the more that's kind of considered in your strategic planning, the better off an organization's going to be in that case. So let me give you an example. Anybody who works in the OPWDD world here? A couple of you. So in the past, we used to have something called Medicaid Service Coordination. There were a lot of organizations that got this Medicaid Service Coordination billing, and you could actually make a profit from Medicaid Service Coordination. We had a client who was making, they had about $2 million worth of Medicaid Service Coordination revenue, and they were dropping several $100,000 to the bottom line from that revenue stream. That really was the only revenue they were making as an organization. That's where all their profits came from. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. That was eliminated effective July 1st of last year. So all of a sudden you've got, $2 million of your revenue going away, and you got all your profitability going away. What are you doing as an organization to make up for it? So it's really important to understand what's happening within your environment so that you can kind of protect yourself. So what's happening out there? There's been a big movement to managed care. right? So it used to be that you got fee-for-service revenue. Anywhere now where there's Medicaid involved, there's a big push towards managed care. So what managed care is it's really working through insurance carriers. It's working through rates that are negotiated rates. And if you're a small organization, how much influence do you think you really have on negotiating those rates? Probably not a whole lot. So what do you think managed care is going to do to the sector? It's going to cause there to be a lot more collaboration that's taking place. It's going to cause organizations to come together. It's going to cause there to be some mergers that are going to take place in the sector. So some of the big industries that are moving into managed care, there's been discussion that you could see 30 to 50% of the organizations that are currently serving those marketplaces going away. So if you're in an industry that there's going to be managed care stepping in and having a big impact, what do you think you should be doing right now? You really should be looking at and evaluating how managed care is going to impact your organization, right? You should be looking at, am I a buyer or seller in terms of how, if I'm a small organization, maybe I need to merge in with a bigger organization, or maybe I need to collaborate more effectively with a larger organization. If I'm a larger organization with deep pockets, maybe I need to start thinking about how do I pull other organizations to me so I got more leverage in negotiating with the managed care companies, okay? There's a movement from outputs to outcomes. So it used to be that, you did 1,000 units of service. Great, you did 1,000 units of service. How effective were those 1,000 units of service? It didn't really matter. You did 1,000 units of service. Well, there's a lot of things that are happening now that are going to make it much more important to really understand the impact that you're having. The president set up a management agenda where he's incorporated performance into his grant awards. So he's saying that grant awards, federal grant awards, there should be a performance piece of it. Well, if you really haven't been tracking your impact and you haven't really been understanding the performance that you have, how are you going to be able to write grants to obtain these grants? How are you going to be able to track what you're doing from a performance perspective to be able to show that you're meeting the requirements under these grants? Again, with this whole push, it's impact over quantity. So it's, what's the quality? How are you changing lives? And it looks at it both from a micro and a macro perspective. From a micro perspective, it's, what are you doing to change the lives of the individuals that you're serving? From a macro is what's the impact you're having on the community. Okay, and it's not just government funders that are looking at this and the federal government, it's also your donors. Donors are looking much more in terms of social return on investment. Donors want to understand what it is that you are doing to make an impact. There's so many organizations out there. How do you get your voice heard? Okay, and the way you get your voice heard is by showing that you can make a difference and that you're really leveraging returns of what you're doing. I like examples. So let me give you an example. So there's an organization out there that does surgeries overseas. They go to third world countries and they do heart surgeries in these third world countries, okay? So what they do is they bring in a certain amount of donations. They use those donations to provide travel for doctors who donate their time. They also use those donations to buy equipment so that they can bring that equipment to hospitals in these third world countries that don't have the equipment that they need. All right, so they spend $500,000 on buying equipment and paying for doctors. And these are all made up numbers, but $500,000 for buying equipment and paying for doctors to travel down there. The doctors are donating their time. So right on top, I've got $500,000 worth of cash. I've got probably $2 to $3 million worth of doctor surgery time that's being done. What are the doctors doing while they're down there? They're utilizing the equipment within the hospitals and they're teaching the doctors down there how to do these surgeries, right? So when they leave the site, you've got an educated and trained group of doctors down there. Think about the selling points of that and think about how you've just leveraged that $500,000 worth of cash into something that's probably closer to $10, $20 million worth of impact. And if you can sell that and you can tell that story effectively, it's going to go a long way in terms of talking to your donors. So one of the things you need to do when you're kind of looking at this whole movement to outcomes and impact is you really have to look at your story. What is it that you do? And how do I tell that story effectively to get that message across? By the way, you're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to laugh if I tell a joke. You're allowed to do anything to show some level of form that you guys are alive. So again, going back to telling that story, how do you effectively tell the story? You want to make it simple. So you want to make it, you want to quantify, make it count. So you want to quantify what's going on, make it clear, simplify the message wherever possible so that people can understand it. People have an attention span of about 5 seconds. I'm sorry, what was I saying? But people have an attention span of about 5 seconds. All right. Make it fast. So that, sorry, 8 seconds. I have an attention span of 5. Everybody else is 8. Make it visual. People they don't want to read anymore. They want to see things. They want to hear things. And make it a story. You want to connect your message to emotions. You want to kind of bring that story part in it. So kind of incorporate all those things. You have to make it qualitative and quantitative. So it has to be information that's shows the impact, but it also has to be, there has to be some qualitative aspects to it. And you can focus on the triple bottom line. You've got people, you've got planet, and you've got profit. Nonprofit organizations are allowed to make a profit, and they should. You want to focus on how am I making money as an organization, but you want to, the whole aspect of, social entrepreneurism and getting to that people, planet, and profit is important. So what do you think the tax code has done to donations? Question. You still need to build fiscal strength within your organization. An organization that is showing losses year after year, an organization that may not be around in the future. If I'm a donor, I don't want to kind of bet on a dead horse. I want to bet on an organization that's moving forward. And the question was, people don't want to really hear about profit. There's open seats in the front row, open seats in the front row. So you're right. People don't necessarily like the word profit, but I think people have to understand that a nonprofit organization needs to build up reserves and everything else so that they can do what they need to do. And part of the issue is that you find that government funders just don't want to fund administrative costs anymore. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple minutes. So shrinking discretionary dollars. I mean, with the change in the tax law, okay, where people aren't necessarily itemizing anymore, what's the incentive for people to give to nonprofit organizations? A lot of people gave because they said they gave because of the tax deductibility piece of it. That tax deductibility people for a portion of it for a lot of people isn't there anymore. So you're seeing that there's shrinking discretionary dollars. There's more information available in the marketplace. So you've got everybody competing for the same dollars. What happens when the government contracts the amount of money that they're giving? Organizations that relied on government funding in the past now have to rely more upon discretionary dollars. So they push for more contributions. So you got more people competing for those same dollars. There's a lot more information out there. People are a lot more educated. It used to be years and years ago, people gave locally. That doesn't happen anymore. People follow whatever cause that they believe in, and it doesn't have to be local. So if there's a catastrophe in Puerto Rico, people are going to throw money there. So the dollars are flying off Long Island. They're going to other places, and it makes it even harder. If we look at some of the statistics and stuff and how people are giving, some things to kind of keep in mind. How many of you guys have golf outings? A lot of you guys have golf outings. How many of you have set sponsorships within those golf outings? Okay. How many of you have called me to sponsor your golf outing? A couple of you guys. Okay. I don't golf. I hate golf. It's not something I'm interested in. Okay. So if you call me about a golf outing, I'm not going to do anything, especially if you say, hey, I want you to give me $10,000 towards a golf outing. How about, hey, why don't you give me $10,000 and let's talk about how I can set up a strategic partnership with you so that you get the benefit and we get the benefit. So that one size fits all approach doesn't really fit all anymore. We have to kind of think a little bit differently in this. We've entered into and I mentioned this, I think, at the last seminar I did, but we've entered into a joint venture with Book Fairies, which is a nonprofit organization that puts books in the hands of children that don't have access to books. And what we've decided is for every hour of billable service we have as a firm, we're going to help to put a book in the hands of a child. from our perspective, we believe in education. So we thought that was extremely important for us. We're able to leverage that relationship, put it in our proposals and everything else. They're doing a good job of promoting us as a firm and everything else. So everybody wins. So again, it comes down to, how do you think differently? How do you reach your corporate partners and bring to the table something that they want to hear about and something they want to see? Okay, that's what they're interested in. They're not necessarily interested in giving you $10,000 to be a sponsor of a golf outing, but they would be interested in maybe $10,000 to develop a strategic relationship with your organization in some other way. So I think we just have to think a little bit differently now in terms of how we're approaching the marketplace. A couple things also that we're seeing. Question, Frank? I didn't say that donations are not tax deductible. What I said was, and the question is, I said that donations are not tax deductible. What's happening is, because the itemized deduction limit has increased significantly over where it was, a lot of people aren't itemizing anymore. If people don't itemize, the charitable contributions are part of those itemized deductions. So if you're not itemized, whether you give a donation or you don't give a donation, you're getting the same deduction. So that has disincentivized people from giving or saying they gave. The threshold for what? It's $12,000, I believe. I'm not a tax guy, but I think it's $12,000. It's okay. I think it's $12,000. It used to be $6,000, so it's doubled. Couple things to kind of keep in mind in some of the trends that are happening in the fundraising world. There's been a 40% year-over-year increase in monthly subscription-based donations. How many of you guys belong to a gym? How many of you guys have a gym membership? A lot. How many of you actually attend and go to the gym? So less than the hands that were up, but okay. So this is kind of the gym approach to fundraising. So what you basically say is, hey, give me an amount every month. I'll charge it to your credit card, okay? And every month that gets hit to the credit card, people forget about it. It's sitting out there and it gets charged every single month, like your gym membership, which you also forgot about. But there's been a big uptick in the amount of donations that are coming through to nonprofit organizations through these subscription plans. And it's something nonprofits should think about, because it allows you, instead of saying to somebody, give me $1,000, it's give me $100 a month, you know, and it's the same number at the end of the day, but it's monthly, and you don't have to keep going back and asking every single year, because then you're building off last year's. Unless their credit card changes, then you're getting the same money in every year. 28% of all donations were made via email this past year. That's way up from where it was in the past. Customized email campaigns. So if you can customize your email campaign, it nets 760% more in contributions. So if you can kind of target your marketplace, customize the email campaign to the population you're looking to go after, you get more money. Generation Z, that is, I believe it's 18 and lower or 19 and lower right now, Generation Z. They comprise 27% of the population, and 30% of them have already donated to charity. So you've got this big population out there that are very, very charity oriented already. So you got to kind of figure out, how do I get and tap this marketplace also? Video messaging increases the likelihood of conducting a transaction by 97%. And you want that video messaging to be short, under 30 seconds. So instead of having just words, you know, if you can put a little video in there, you know, with one of your consumers, or if you can tell a story of, or follow. So let's go back to that example I had about the heart organization that did the heart surgeries overseas. So if I had a situation where I was going to allow you to follow a child who was going through a surgery, and you got to meet the child up front before the surgery took place and their family, and then the doctor talked for 30 seconds, and then you actually got to meet the child afterwards, and then they came back, you know, 3 months later and the child's doing great. How do you think that's going to play out from a donation perspective? Yeah, so again, kind of think about that in terms of your donations. Big push to digital fundraising. All right, so there's been a big push to digital fundraising. So you got people are craving more human content. People want to connect. We are social beings, okay? We want to connect. So you have certain things like Facebook Live, which is live streaming of events. We have Periscope through Twitter. You have Instagram stories. People want to connect. Utilize the different medias that exist out there to help them to connect with your organization. Take Instagram. There are 500 million people using Instagram each day. 59% of them are under the age of 30 years old. But if you're going to go after the individuals, you need a formalized strategy. But you've got all of these people that are out there. You've got influencers on Instagram. My daughter, who is 27 years old, 2 weeks ago, she came home and I just went blank on her name. We'll call her Beth. She said, my friend Beth spoke to me today on Instagram. I'm like, who's Beth? She goes, oh, she's someone with like 5 million followers. I'm like, do you even know her? Have you ever met her? No, but she's got 5, she spoke to me. You know, so there are all of these influencers that are out there. If you can connect to these influencers, they have a way, actually her name was Brittany. I just remember the name, but they have a way of helping to drive traffic to your organization if you can get them to support you. So again, look at what's out there in terms of that. There's also P2P social media. Giving Tuesday raised $125 million this past year. Facebook birthdays. How many of you guys use Facebook birthdays? There's a few of you. Again, I'll bring up my same daughter. Her birthday was back in May. And she went on to Facebook. She set up a Facebook birthday for Nature's Conservancy. Nature's Conservancy has no idea who she is. Nature's Conservancy has never met her. They've never had communication with her. And she raised $1,000 for Nature's Conservancy through her Facebook birthday. Think about how you can leverage all of the people and volunteers and stuff that are involved with your organization if you can get them to just post on Facebook birthday and try to raise money for your organization. How many of you guys are gamers? A couple of you. Have you heard of Twitch? So Twitch is this platform where gamers watch other gamers play. And Twitch, I mean, you would think, you know, people watch golf, people watch tennis, people watch gamers. And there are gamers there that have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for nonprofit organizations because as they're playing, they say, okay, for the next hour, anybody who wants to contribute, donate to this charity, I'll take out 27, whatever. So they have this whole thing, and there's because during that whole gaming experience, they're talking to the audience, and there's communication going back and forth. So if you can utilize a platform like Twitch, and there are some, I believe in Smithtown, we have one of the top 3 gamers in one of the, I don't know which game it is. It was an article in Newsday about 3 or 4 months ago. One of the top gamers for one of the popular games is here on Long Island. So if you can tap into some of these gamers, some of these big gamers, and get them to support your organization, there's dollars in that. The thing I want you guys to think about here is start thinking differently. Don't just think the traditional ways you've been thinking from a donation perspective. Start thinking other ways that you can kind of tap into and use social media as a way of bringing donations into your organization. Because if you're not doing it, other people are. And if you're all competing for the same dollars, we got to stay on top of it. Christine, I don't know what time my break is. So just if someone can let me know when I've got like a couple minutes left. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed something. Sorry. Artificial intelligence and chatbots. So chatbots allow you to establish communication with people who so think about your phone a second. And it happens to me all the time. I go to type something and it autocorrects and it sends out, or autofills. Forget the autocorrects, it autofills. So it knows what I'm going to say because it's been monitoring me for a while and it knows what my normal response is. So there's a lot of FUs that kind of go out and things like that, but it knows what my normal responses are, right? So in this case, you're in a situation where you can utilize artificial intelligence to do the same thing and communicate with your donor, so that you don't have to have necessarily people communicating with your donors, but there's a lot of that communication that's kind of happening behind the scenes to kind of initiate some of that initial conversation that takes place. And it helps to reduce the amount of staff that you need. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening with artificial intelligence now. More emphasis on infusing business concepts into the nonprofit sector. Information is king. Everybody wants information. The more information you have, the better your dashboards that you design within your organization, the better you are at being able to, I think that's for me. The better you are in terms of being able to, stay ahead of the curve. The world is changing. The world is changing fast, and we got to stay ahead of that. So by having that information, by establishing dashboards, it's very important. Social entrepreneurism, I mentioned that earlier. I think what you're seeing is that the next generation that's going to be entering in the workforce, as I mentioned earlier, are much more socially oriented. And you're seeing that there's a much bigger emphasis towards building social related businesses and developing more social relationships with nonprofit organizations. So I think you're going to see that there's going to be kind of an uptick in this whole aspect of social responsibility. And I think that's a good thing for the nonprofit sector. And I think, the sooner that you can start to tap into that marketplace, the better off you are. You're going to see increased collaboration and mergers. You have to see increased collaboration and mergers. We talked about it earlier with managed care. But the whole aspect of trying to find ways to streamline, to cut administrative costs, because we're not necessarily getting funded for that anymore, to make up for the fact that we're losing government funding, all of those things. It's going to be more and more where organizations are going to have to come together, and they're going to have to come together effectively. Do you guys remember when there used to be the big 8 accounting firms, and now we're down to the big 4? Well, most of that consolidation from the big 8 to the big 4 was organizations or these large accounting firms coming together. The first ones, 1 or 2 that came together, they came together because strategically it made sense. By the time you got to the third merger that took place, they were the only 2 left. And they came together because they were the only 2 left. And if they wanted to be one of the big boys, they had to do it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're the only 2 left. So again, I think it comes down to including within your strategic thinking, what do I need to do in terms of where are we as an organization? Are we okay to be standing on our own 2 feet? Should we be looking at acquiring other organizations? Should we be looking at being acquired? How many of you guys are baseball fans? What happens every July? We hit the trading deadline, right? And what happens is that teams are deciding, am I a buyer or am I a seller? I think as an organization, you got to kind of think the same thing. Do I have the resources that are going to allow me to make the run for the World Series? Or do I not have the resources that are going to allow me to make the run? And therefore I really think about, maybe, finding a strategic partner to work with. I know it's not good news, I'm sorry, but it's the reality of where we are as an industry. Increased level of government audits and regulations. How many of you guys have been audited by a governmental agency? How many of you expect to be audited by a government? If you're getting government funding, you're going to get audited. I mean, it's not a matter of, if anymore, it's a matter of when. Every single organization pretty much gets audited, and the takebacks are pretty big when those happen. So you have to really think about compliance. You need to make sure that you have in place good compliance programs. You have to make sure you have in place quality assurance. You need to make sure that if you've got computer applications that you're utilizing them to the greatest potential, and that there are checks and balances built into those computer applications to kind of help you through some of this monitoring. Because if you're not doing it, you could be doing the greatest job in the world, but if you miss something from a compliance perspective, you have to give the money back. And do you really have the reserves to be able to handle that? We're working with an organization that we were brought in after the fact, but they had an audit several years ago from the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General. And as a result of that audit, they owed back $4 million. Okay. 3 years later, the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General came back and said, hey, we found $4 million the first time. Let's see how they're doing things. They probably owe back another $3 or $4 million. So they retained us to look at the stuff that's happening now. And we're looking at it and said, if you don't clean this up, the third strike will be your final strike. But they're still having problems. You need to make sure you have compliance in place, because if you don't have compliance, it could be the end of your organization. Everyone cares about controls. There's a big, big emphasis on controls and building a strong control environment. That's going to come back to play on audits. Remember, from a control perspective, your board sets policy, right? Management implements policy, and then it's the board's responsibility to monitor that the policies are working effectively. And it doesn't mean the board comes in and tests it. It means that the board really should be getting feedback in terms of what's happening with respect to the control environment. So it's important that that's happening. How many changes have there been in your reimbursement methodology in the last 5 years? A lot, right? How many changes have there been in benefit rules in the last 5 years? I mean, it seems like they're changing daily. Every time you turn around, there's new rules and regulations. How do you stay ahead of them as a nonprofit organization? What are you guys doing to make sure that you're staying in compliance with the rules and regulations? Because every one of them comes with a booby trap, right? Again, this wasn't supposed to be like Debbie Downer, sorry. So again, just think about, the changes that have happened in the benefit regulations in the last 3 or 4 years. If you're operating out of New York City, you've got sick pay rules that have gone into effect. There's been a change in minimum wage, right? And how does that change in minimum wage? Yeah, some of the government funders have given you additional dollars to cover that change in minimum wage, but they haven't really thought about the implications of, well, what about the people who are making a little bit more than that? And now I've just brought the lowest level people up to a salary that's $1 less than them, and they've been there for 20 years. So there's a lot of repercussions that this is having, and how do we deal with those repercussions? There's new exempt employee limits, and how do you stay on top of exempt versus non-exempt employees, and what am I allowed to dock them for if they don't show up for work, and all this other stuff that comes into play. Family Medical Leave Act rules, Department of Labor regulations. How many of you guys have pension plans? A few of you. When you think about pension plans, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there have been some lawsuits where employees have sued their plan sponsor, the nonprofit organization. It's happened right now in several universities. The first one was settled on behalf of the university, but still, there are lawsuits that are happening because plans or plan sponsors are not doing their fiduciary duty under the plan. They're not going in and doing regular benchmarking to see that the plan fees are appropriate fees. They're not looking at the investment alternatives that are in the plan to see if the investment alternatives are appropriate and if they're performing effectively. They're not educating their staff on the investment choices. There was one of the things which I kind of found funny in one of the lawsuits. One of the claims was that the plan sponsor, the nonprofit, had too many investments in the plan, and they couldn't make a decision as to what they should invest in because there were too many alternatives. So, this is out there. On top of that, the Department of Labor has been going in and doing audits of these plans. So just kind of keep that in mind. How many of you guys are having fun finding board members? I probably think that's the biggest challenge we hear all the time. How do I get board members? How do I find new blood? How do I, attract and retain? And that's been a big issue. Some of that, and David's going to talk about some of this today, is, you've got a whole lot of governance rules that come into play. And, you know, when we look at how boards operate and how we get board members in, you know, what are we doing in terms of trying to attract those new board members? What are we doing in terms of educating the board members when they come in? What contracts or agreements do we have with the board members so the board members know what their responsibilities are once they come into the organization? What do we expect from them and what should they expect from us? How many of you guys, when you hire new staff, interview the staff? I hope all of you. Okay. How many of you guys, when you bring on new board members, actually go through the same sort of process and interview the board members to see if they're a proper fit for the organization? A lot less than interview employees. A lot of organizations are so happy to just find someone who's willing to be on their board that they don't even care whether it's the right fit or they're going to be a good resource for the organization. You know, there really should be some sort of process there. And I think a lot of this goes back to some of the earlier stuff we talked about. If you're an organization that's showing impact, if you're an organization that's getting your voice out there, if you're an organization that's showing that you're doing things the right way, you've got proper controls, everything is functioning effectively. I can't see what that says. 15 minutes? Okay, thanks. If you're doing things effectively, then you're going to be in a situation where you'll have an easier time attracting board members, right? People want to be involved with a winner. So if you can show organizations that you're doing things, or potential board members that you're doing things the right way, you'll have a better chance of attracting them. The other thing is, so many organizations go after the same people to be their board members. Think a little differently. Instead of going after the main person within an organization, go after a lower tier person in the organization in hopes that they'll grow within the organization. If you've got the, for someone like me, you know, I'm on some boards and I'm busy, but if you go after my wife, she actually holds the checkbook anyway. So she has more control over it than I do. But just think a little differently is all I'm trying to say. You know, go after whoever it is that you're going to go after, but try to find strategic partners that'll work more effectively for you. How many of you are familiar with the Nonprofit Revitalization Act? It's been around for how many years, David? So it's been around 6 years, and it's changed 3 times during that 6-year period of time. There's a lot of rules and regulations that are in that Nonprofit Revitalization Act that could impact a lot of your governing documents. So just make sure that you go back. If you haven't looked at your governing documents in a while, make sure you go back and look at them and with respect to the Nonprofit Revitalization Act. Question? I'm sorry, go after. The Nonprofit Revitalization Act? David, are you going to be talking a bit about the Nonprofit Revitalization Act today? Okay. So I don't want to steal David's thunder, but I'll talk a little bit about the act. So the Nonprofit Revitalization Act was probably one of the most sweeping changes in New York nonprofit law in over 40 years. The Nonprofit Revitalization Act incorporated a bunch of things to try to make it easier for nonprofits to function. So it allowed a lot more electronic communication and everything else. There's new documentation and communication regarding related party transactions and conflicts of interest. So if you haven't updated conflict of interest policies since the Nonprofit Revitalization Act, you probably should. You need to look at your bylaws and make sure that your bylaws align with the Nonprofit Revitalization Act in terms of how meetings can be held, the communication surrounding meetings, all of those types of things. There's been issues in the past where under nonprofit law, you're required to review your financial statements with the board within 6 months of the end of your year. So if you're a December 31st year end, you're supposed to be reviewing your financial statements with your board by June 30th. I know that that doesn't always happen, but that is a requirement. So all I'm saying is that and the list goes on, and David will talk a little bit more about it. But there's so many rules and regulations that exist within this Nonprofit Revitalization Act, and it's important that you take the time to just kind of read through it, or I know David has on his website, and we have on our website some articles regarding it, and this way you can kind of streamline that. How many of you have heard of the New York Prudent Management of Investment Funds Act, NIPMIFA? So a few of you. What NIPMIFA is, it serves two purposes, NIPMIFA. The first is if you get any endowments, so if you've got endowments coming into your organization, the first thing you have to think about when you get those permanently restricted funds is what's the donor intent? And you have to look to the governing documents or the donor document for the donation. But if the document is silent or it's not clear, NIMIFA steps in. And NIMIFA says that based on the rules within NIMIFA, there's two things that the board can do. They can either decide to hold the funds in perpetuity, which means you don't spend the corpus, or you can spend down the corpus in meeting the obligations or what the donor's intent was. So let me give you an example. If I've got an organization that is a school, and the school provides scholarships to some of their students, if I get $1 million in, and it's not clear from the donor how that $1 million of funds that are an endowment. So the endowment comes in and says, here's $1 million. I want you to use I want you to hold the funds, but use the $1 million resources to cover scholarships. There's two ways you can kind of look at this. The first is, all right, I'm going to take the investment income each year and use the investment income to make scholarships. The second way you can look at it is, well, the donor's intent was to make contributions every single year and to provide a scholarship every year. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 4% of whatever the balance is each year to make scholarships. And if that means that the corpus drops below the original amount of $1 million, so be it. Or if the investment returns are really big and that 4% causes that corpus to grow each year because we got a 6% return and we only spent 4%, so be it. So there are kind of two ways that you can kind of focus on this. And it's something to think about if you've got endowments and kind of go back and look at it. The other thing that NIPMIFA does is it requires organizations to kind of look at their investments on an annual basis. And some of you are saying, well, we don't have investments. Well, if you have money market accounts and you're keeping money in a money market account's an investment. So NIPMIFA has a series of criteria. I think there's 8 different criteria in terms of your investment strategy. And it looks at time horizon of money. It looks at rate of return, everything else. If you've got 365 days of cash on hand, and you're putting in a money market account, is that really the best resource for you to be using? Is that an appropriate, because when NIPMIFA looks at risk, it doesn't say you shouldn't take too much risk. It says you should take the appropriate amount of risk. So if I take too little risk, I could have a problem under NIPMIFA too. So really what it requires you to do is look at your investments on an annual basis. And at the board level, you should really be making a statement on an annual basis saying that the investment alternative, even if it's sitting in money market, the investments that we have selected, money market is an appropriate risk for this organization, and here's why. So something to kind of think about. Risk management is something that's important in the nonprofit world, and we've already talked about pension a little bit, but pensions are coming under a lot of scrutiny. Organizations, set up these pension plans to try to provide for benefit for their employees, yet they're running into problems because these pension plans are up. We talked a bit about some of the problems, but how many of you guys have actually benchmarked your plan within the last 3 years? A couple of you. You really should be benchmarking your plan on a regular basis. We usually tell people at least once every 3 years. How many of you sit with your investment advisors annually? A few of you. You should be sitting with your investment advisors on an annual basis and reviewing the stock selections or the investment selections that are in there to make sure they're appropriate. How many of you have auto enrollment policies within your plan? You guys are awesome because you've raised your hand every single one of these. But auto enrollment is one of the things that we suggest to all of our clients because it forces people into the plan at the time that they become eligible. So when an employee becomes eligible, it forces them into the plan and starts withholding from them, and they have to elect out of the plan as opposed to electing into the plan. And if part of your goal is to do the right thing for your staff, and to make sure that your staff have the resources that they need when they're ready to retire, you're doing a good job for them by doing it. I'm assuming your plan then also allows for increases in that auto enrollment every year, because that's something you can do that. And then there's also provisions that we suggest that I don't know how many of you know that if the number of participants, if you guys are a small plan, if the number of participants within your plan pass over 120, and those are people who are participating or who are eligible to participate in the plan, once that crosses over 120, you're required to have an audit by an outside accounting firm. So you really don't want that to cross over 120. We want to keep that under 120. So one of the things that you should be doing also on a regular basis is if you put in your plan as part of your plan document, that if an employee has a balance of $5,000 or lower, you can automatically move them out of the plan. That's a great provision so that you can put them into an IRA that's outside of your plan and it doesn't count towards that 120 count. So again, something else to think about for those people who are kind of pushing the limit of that 120 and don't want to cross over that threshold. How many of you guys have who are receiving government funding on a fee-for-service basis or are receiving Medicaid funding? How many of you guys have a Medicaid compliance program in place? How many of you have quality assurance? For those of you who have those and have Medicaid compliance and quality assurance, is there regular reporting to the board of directors? All right, good. Because you really should have that regular reporting to the board of directors. Remember, the board is responsible for the overall governance of the organization. You also should be training your board. If there's Medicaid compliance and you have a Medicaid compliance officer, that Medicaid compliance officer is required to be training the board members. IT environment. There's so much protected health information. And so you've got HIPAA, you got FERPA, you got all these different rules out there. And you've got this, IT world where all this information is kind of held, even credit cards from donors. How are you ensuring that information is being safeguarded? And don't forget, because if there's a breach of that safeguarding, and there seems to be a breach from companies almost every single day. I mean, I get letters all the time. If there's a breach, you have to notify individuals that there's been a breach. What impact do you think that's going to have in your donor base? All right, so it's going to be really, really important. It's important for you to kind of set policies, protect data, do some hacking to make sure that the data is good and clean and protected and everything else. Make sure you got good firewalls in place, all that stuff. Any questions on any of this stuff? Executive Order 38. How many of you guys are familiar with Executive Order 38? Just a couple of you. So Executive Order 38, how many of you guys receive state funding? Let's talk from there. So more than the 3 hands that went up about Executive Order 38. So then how many of you are not in compliance? All the hands that other than the 3, potentially. If you have state funding that's coming in, and it doesn't have to be state originated. It could be federally originated passing through the state. It could be state originated passing through a county or other municipality. If you're getting over a certain dollar amount and a certain percentage of your funding from those sources, you're subject to Executive Order 38. Executive Order 38 was put in about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And what Executive Order 38 has is it has 2 thresholds. The first threshold under Executive Order 38, or the first requirement, is that your executive staff, executive administrative staff, cannot generate a salary from state resources of more than $199,000. If they get a salary of more than $199,000, you have to check a safe harbor, and that safe harbor would be to do a salary study or commission a salary study and find out if those individuals are in the bottom 75th% of their comparative group. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it was looking at administrative spending. And it started off at 25%, dropped to 20%, now it's down to 15%. And when you think about it, you can't spend more than 15% of the monies that you spend in an administrative capacity. That 15% is not a whole lot of money. There needs to be that investment in infrastructure and everything else. And, unfortunately, it seems these days that infrastructure, administrative costs, and everything else are a dirty word. And that's a problem. So Executive Order 38 is out there. Just be aware of it. If anybody has any questions about it, you can kind of reach out and ask. But it's something that you got to keep in mind. We haven't seen it go anywhere. We haven't seen anybody audited on Executive Order 38. I don't even know where that information is going. I actually think it's a political ploy from Governor Cuomo to kind of get elected for president or whatever he happens to be running for. Because from a soundbite perspective, who can say there's anything wrong by saying, I think that nonprofit executives are getting too much money and they're spending too much on administration. We're going to curtail that. But so we haven't seen anything happen from it, but just understand that the rule is out there. This is me, so that you weren't confused. I wore the same clothes because I know people get confused very easily. So I just wanted to make sure everybody realized that that was me. Does anybody have any questions before I pass on the mic to David and let him talk about governance and what's happening in the world of law? So I think the question was that in the for-profit sector, profit is a driving force behind mergers. In the nonprofit sector, is profit a driving force, or is there something else that's a driving force within the nonprofit sector? And I don't think profit is a factor. And go ahead, sorry. Founder syndrome, yeah. So I think what you find is founder syndrome is definitely an issue. Founders don't like to give it up, and you have boards also who hold tight to things. I think you're going to find that over the next probably 10 to 12 years, there's going to be a lot of retirement of a lot of the generation of those founders who started these organizations. So there's going to need to be new blood coming into these organizations. And I think once those founders start to retire, you are going to see a little more from a consolidation. I think people have to realize that we're in a different world than we were in, and you have to be thinking about merger today, because if you get to a point where you utilize all of your resources and you burn out your resources, and then you start thinking about merger, nobody's going to want you. So you kind of have to start thinking about that merger when you're in a position of not necessarily strength, but at least some level of strength. But it's not necessarily profit. I think it's more how do we function strategically? How do we leverage the capabilities of other organizations? How do we grow horizontally and vertically so that we're more attractive to our funders, that we've got a different diverse base in terms of how we can attract grants. Maybe if we're doing more, we have bigger outcomes and bigger impact, which will enable us to attract more dollars. Again, I think you have to look at this strategically and look to see who the best strategic partners are for you so that you can decide whether it's a good fit or not. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring David up now and hopefully.